So, good morning to everyone. This roundtable is titled Transition Tardiness, a problem with the method. Erratic, too slow, bumpy, desynchronized, polarizing, these are the features of the transition that we are witnessing. We have exhausted time for achieving a smooth transition. Most of our carbon budget is depleted. And sadly, the transition has barely begun. Worldwide emissions keep growing, or at best are flattening, except in times of recession. Despite this insufficient pace and scale, the necessary changes are fiercely opposed. Faced with energy and geopolitical shocks, governments postpone decisive actions. Fossil fuel subsidies are increased, coal phase-out are deferred. Societies are highly polarized on climate change, not much longer on its existence, but on the solution to tackle the issue. Decision makers are torn apart between, on the one hand, calls for acceleration, and on the other, calls for protection. Acceleration versus protection, this is the dilemma we are facing today. I believe we have a perfect casting to address that question of transition tardiness. I am delighted to introduce our speakers. I would like to start with Mrs. Claire Waysand, Executive Vice President and General Secretary at Engie. Then Mrs. Anne-Christine Champion, Co-Head of Natixis CIB. Mr. Christian Gollier, Executive Director at the Toulouse School of Economics. And Mr. Philippe Zaouati, Chief Executive Officer at Mirova. Furthermore, on the sideline, we have with us Frédéric de Bailleul, who is a scriber. He will illustrate our conversation during the panel. So thank you for being with us. And I am Cédric Merle, Head of Expertise and Innovation at Natixis Green Hub, and I'm very delighted to moderate this roundtable. So I would like to start with the first question. Why are we unable to fast-track the transition? Do we have a problem with the method? Is the method the problem?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, we are lucky to live in Europe, and particularly in France, where there is a strong consensus on the human origin of climate change. But the reality is there is no consensus at all about how should we face this responsibility toward future generation, in particular, what should be done, when should it be done, by who should be on the cost. There is zero consensus on that. So it's indeed a methodological issue there. And it's particularly true for the financial sector. What's the role of bankers? What the roles of pension funds? What the roles of investors? There is huge debate about that, and clearly there is no obvious method about, I mean, from the point of view of non-expert, there is no obvious methods to solve the question. So clearly there is a methodological issue, and we are fighting with this. And we are fighting with this in the public debate. For example, typically people disagree about who should do what. Think about the debate this summer about the private jets. Should we ban private jets? Should we reduce speed on highway from 130 to 110 km per hour? There is just a statement, but no argument. Why should we do this rather than that? Why don't we stop using coal? Well, probably these days is not a good idea to stop coal very quickly given the crisis, but there is a debate here. The good news is that the social return of the efforts to reduce emission is extremely large. I mean, efforts to reduce CO2 emission today the cost of that will be much smaller than the damages, climate damages we will face if we don't do those investments. So the social return is very large. The problem is the social return. It's not a private return. The return for the investors who decide to reduce emission will be for humanity, not for him. So obviously there is a free riding problem there.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Picking up on what Christian just said, I think there is indeed in Europe a clear view of where we have to go, and this view is picking up more broadly. I mean, the decreasing of emission is clearly now on everybody's mind. The issue is how do we get there? And I think there are good news again is that there is a lot of money ready to be invested in this kind of activities. Good news too, there are many corporates, and I'm part of one, Engie, who are fully committed to energy transition. Why? Because for an energy company, that's the best way to have a business model that's sustainable. That's a clear-cut choice. Once this is being said, I think we need the other side to align, because energy transition can only be a joint effort. We need money, we need private investors, we need action by the public sector that encourages energy transition, be it in the form of a carbon price, be it in the form of regulations, or be it in the form of subsidies to more emerging technologies. That's a necessary framework. And then we need to make sure that everybody's on board, and that goes to Christian's point on the debates on private jets and others. We need ownership. We need acceptability. Energy transition will only succeed if we have the four corners of the square that are well in place. Money to finance, investors, industrials ready to do it, public action that's supportive and well-designed, and I think we'll go back to this, and acceptability. And I think as part of our responsibilities of an energy company, I think it's our role to say what works, what doesn't work. It's also our role to be very attentive to the issue of ownership and acceptability. And for instance, we have developed, we are, for instance, the first developer of photovoltaic energy and onshore wind in France. But we are very aware that there are acceptability issues, and we have developed a label with Bureau Veritas to certify a methodology by which what we do is fully consistent with environmental standards, be it energy or biodiversity, and also consistent with a good implication of local authorities. I think that's key. We will need really the four: the money, the investors, the state, and acceptability.
Thank you. So combining different means, having consistency between the instruments and having the incentives. Not only public policies are being contested, and I would like to turn over now to Philippe and Christine. Sustainable finance is also under the fire of criticism for various reasons, for going too far, for not delivering enough results, or also for losing actors in burdensome disclosures. So what's your take on that, on the method and the approaches and the criticism regarding sustainable finance?
May I start? Yes, we started at Mirova to invest in what we call sustainable finance 10 years ago. And what we have been doing these last 10 years is trying to reallocate capital into companies, projects which are doing the transition, which are good for this transition into a decarbonized and fairer world. And today we are in front of a lot of controversies, as you mentioned. On the one hand, you have the Texas government saying that ESG and sustainable finance is something very dangerous for the economy, and that they want to just blackmail all the companies which are just excluding some of the oil companies from their portfolio. And so you have this kind of strange discussion between BlackRock on one hand and the Texas government on the other hand, which is not exactly what I think should be the discussion at the heart of responsible finance. And the big problem is that there is a lot of discussion on the methodologies, on the method, on the standards and labels, and that is a big mess. And regulation is coming on the top of this, helping to a certain extent, but sometimes also adding some difficulties. And we are seeing this, for example, with the SFDR directive in Europe, with this distinction between Article 8 and Article 9 funds, which means Article 8 being, you just integrate ESG, and Article 9, you want to make a positive impact. And today, there are a lot of difficulties to draw the line between these two categories. And the big issues for me is that some of the observers, and more especially medias, but also some investors, could throw the baby with the water. And that's very dangerous, because they are some very interesting things in sustainable finance. But on the one hand, there is a lot of greenwashing, and on the other hand, there are people who are just mixing all these in the same box, and we need to really try to distinguish which is really making sense, though which is not making sense. For example, in an article just published this morning by Le Monde and a lot of European big newspapers, they're just saying that green funds are useless, and Mirova is mentioned in this paper, and one of the reasons they say that green funds is useless, concerning Mirova, is the fact that in some of our funds we have investment in Engie, because Engie is considered as a grey company, and so that if we are invested in grey company, we are not green funds. So that's a very big issue, because we have been stopping to investing in oil and coal 10 years ago. So we are very committed in a very strong way in this transition thing. And today, some of the observers say, okay, what you are doing is exactly the same are investing 20 or 30% of your capital in new oil exploration plants. That's not the same. There are some differences, and we have to focus on this and to show that we can distinguish these different behaviors.
Yeah, if I can just say a word, because Philippe, you mentioned Engie. I wasn't expecting it. To be clear about Engie, as you know, we come from gas, but today we have the vast majority of our capex into renewable. That's one. And second, we are not into oil never have been, but we're not into gas production. So clearly this choice was made several years ago in order to be fully consistent with energy transition. And today, so we are buying and selling gas, but not producing. And today we are certified below 2 degrees and aiming for well below 2 degrees. So I think on this, and that's an interesting point. The issue is, are you financing the transition, or are you financing activities which are already 100% green? I think when you think about the impact to the economy, you need to finance both.
If I may, well, I will say something that Claire cannot do, because she's an academic. So here is one of. I would like to mention two paradoxes, or methodological problems associated to climate finance. The first one is related to Engie and the discussion we should just add. We have we have activists and we have many people here around that who believe that we should, rather than trying to reduce demand for energy, we should rather reduce supply of energy. So a supply-side climate policy. And so we have activists going to General Assembly of Total Energy, or maybe in Engie, I don't know, trying to impose a reduction of supply in order to force the demand to go down. And there is this general idea among politicians also. Pascal Canfin is a word that crossed my mind on this, that we should protect consumers from the cost of energy transition, and we should put all the costs on the suppliers. And that, of course, that makes no sense, because at the end of the day, there is the increase in cost will be most of the time will be translated in increase in prices paid by consumers. Also, I mean, we see in the energy crisis these days that reducing supply to force reduction of demand is the craziest thing we could have in mind to organize the energy transition. Of course, we need to organize a sobriety in the demand. And if we reduce the supply, just the increase of energy will go, the price of this energy will go up, and the supplier will benefit from that. At the end of the day, we will sacrifice the purchasing power of consumers. So supply-side climate policies are crazy. Yeah. Okay, and so this kind of argument saying why do you continue to invest in natural gas? That we need natural gas for some time, and again we just see it right these days, and it will remain true for some time, probably 10 or 15 years. Of course we need to go out of coal as soon as possible, because coal produces twice as much as CO2 than natural gas when we produce electricity. So switching from coal to natural gas, as it is done currently in the US, we should also do it in Europe as soon as possible after this crisis. So that's a puzzle. I mean, this methodology, we have a deep methodological problem. Thinking of supply-side climate economies as the solution, just crazy. The other methodological issue I have here is also about climate finance. I mean, we have a difficulty I'm not a banker. You have a difficulty as a banker to, if you believe you have a role, and you have a role in the energy transition, because of course the issue at the end of the day, as you said, is we need to reallocate capital toward greener activities. But at the same time, how bankers and the financial sector can do that? At the end of the day, if you want to decarbonize the production of steel, you will increase costs today by something like 1/3, so more than 30%. So if, for example, you as an activist impose a reduction of capital to ArcelorMittal, if it does not transfer its production to a greener process, what you will see if Arcelor decide to do that, it just increase the cost by 1/3. If the competitors do not do the same thing, you just lose, ArcelorMittal will lose its market share and probably will go bankrupt. And at the end of the day, you will transfer the production to brown competitors, and you get nothing. I call that this industrial carbon leakage. So how can you solve this? In a competitive world, you cannot ask some competitors to raise their costs in order to be more responsible. At the end of the day, there is a role for the government to that. Only the government can impose a level playing field methodology where we impose all market players the same rules and the same obligation to be more responsible.
So this is really in line with a workshop today on inflation, especially on inflation, based on the mismatches, on the gaps between the supply and the demand, and much of the efforts that are focusing on the supply with shortages and prices increase. We feel that you are torn apart between acceleration, some activists which want to go further, faster, and also the reality in terms of fuel poverty and changing the economy and ensuring energy security. Yeah.
Can I just pick up, and sorry, just to pick up on what Christian just said about steel, which is a good example. I would just nuance it a little bit in the sense that, for instance, at Engie, we are part of what's called the first mover coalition. So we are committing to use a certain percentage of green steel in the years to come. So there will be, and that's also thanks to investors, thanks to our people too. And because we believe we all need to act so as to have a sustainable world and sustainable business model, there is within the companies the willingness to go, I would say, a step further than what's simply decided by the state or regulation. But certainly, I mean, having there is a limit to this. There is a limit to this because indeed we are competing in an open competition. So there's only so much we can take of extra costs, and that's what's true for steel is true also for other parts of renewable energy, for instance, PV and others. So yes, certainly there is a role, not necessarily at country level, but there is a role by geographies, sufficiently large geographies, to think on how we encourage also the resiliency of supply chain and their decarbonation.
And Christine, maybe you can elaborate on that first mover advantage and
yes.
Yeah.
My view on this is that, in fact, we need both. I think we need both the public sector, the government decision and impact and policies, and the private sector move as well, and the innovation also that comes, I think, with on the private sector side. I think you said it, there is a vision, at least in Europe, and I think if we look at the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, there is a vision in the US, maybe not fully aligned, but there is a vision there, and the question is the way to get there. And the path we have to define all together is a path that we have to define over a long period of time, that we have to define as well across geographies, across sectors, and yet it has to be very local, very detailed, very concrete. So as we discussed preparing this panel, the way I think we can define this path is really taking a kind of helicopter view where you can move from be on the ground, very operational on the projects. Do we finance this project with this client, which is in a gray area? So which are tough decisions to make and to decide, but also on a regular basis, moving up vertically to see whether we are in the right direction, moving in the right direction, and keeping the goals. I think that's a way to manage the complexity. We can see with the debates, which are very passionate, that it's a complex challenge that we have. So in the sustainable finance, obviously, is sharing the same complexity. And here as well, there is innovation that is there to lead and bring new projects, new ways of financing, which are definitely needed for that.
I would like to go back to carbon pricing and other incentives. Christian, you mentioned subsidies, regulation, and we have also some market-based mechanisms, which are mostly working in handbooks. So we'll ask you, why do we have such limits? And maybe, ironically, the current energy prices, we made some calculation. The energy price increase caused by the war in Ukraine is equivalent to de facto carbon pricing. For gas imported in the EU, it would be around $600 per ton of CO2, which is huge. So we have seen the signal which is providing. So how can we handle such a non-desired price signal, and how can we articulate the role of financial actors, market-based mechanisms, and more ban, command and control, and other interventionist policies?
Wow, many questions. Let me try to be short on this. So yes, indeed, the current crisis is somewhat equivalent in terms of incentive, at least short-term incentive to decarbonize the economy. And I was not aware of this number. 600 euros per ton of CO2 is extremely large. I believe that the current price of carbon should rather be around 150 euros per ton of CO2, and most economists believe it should be somewhere around 60, 70 euros per ton of CO2. So, well, first, one point is, I mean, most, as you said, I mean, most of the effort to decarbonize are investments and long-term investments. Changing my car from combustion engine to electricity, it's a 15 years investment for me. So I need to know what will be the price of carbon within the next 15 years, not today, but for the next 15 years to determine whether it's profitable for me to change my car. And same thing for the electricity sector, the gas sector, biofuels, everything. Retrofitting of roads, it takes a long time to recover the initial cost. So my point here is that if we would be sure that the crisis should stay there for 20 years, yes, of course, we should. We would see immediately, since the spring, this enormous willingness to invest in decarbonization at the consumer level, at the production level, everywhere. But of course, the issue is we believe and we hope it will be a temporary crisis, and therefore we need sometime this price of electricity, gas, and coal and oil will go down. And remember, at the end of the day, if we become serious about fighting climate change, we will reduce our demand for oil, gas, and coal. And remember, we have 20 times more resources of those fossil fuels than we need to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. We have something like the carbon budget is around 1,000 gigatons, and the proved reserve is around 20 gigatons. So we have 20 more resources than we need to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. And it implies that one day when we will become serious, the oil-rich country will realize that they will not be able to sell their stuff to the Western world, and they will try to sell before it's too late, and therefore we should expect the price of those resources to go down, and therefore we need a carbon price sometimes. I'm quite surprised to see, for example, on the issues of electric vehicle, that Europe and California plan to ban the selling of new combustion engine car by the year 2035. But what will happen in 2034 when the price of barrel of oil on the international market will go down to, I don't know, $30 per barrel, and at the same time the technological progress is not there, so that the production of electric car remain larger and much larger as it is today than the production of combustion engine car. In that case, there will be an incredible social acceptability problem, where people will see that they will be forced to purchase mobility vehicles that are much more expensive than alternatives. So there is an issue there. Of course, it would be great, as Mohamed mentioned earlier, that the cost of production renewable energy be smaller than the cost of producing and extracting and transporting oil and natural gas. It's a bet. The reality, it's a bet. Maybe Mohamed is right. But economists do not believe that. Economists believe that we will need to have a price of carbon at least equal to 250 euros per ton of CO2 by the year 2030 if we want to get to the target. Remember, in Europe, the target is to reduce emission by 55% by the year 2030 compared to 1990. We only did 25%. For the first 32 years of that period. So we need, for the next now 7 years, to do the other 30%. It's enormous. It's a radical transformation of our way of living, our way of production, and that's, of course, the energy crisis today can help, but only marginally. We need to convince people that if they stay as they are, with their way of living, in their way of production, they will have to pay an incredible cost in the future by doing that.
Yes, picking up on what Christian just said, I think the energy crisis can certainly help if we drove good lessons from the energy crisis. And I think there are some things which are encouraging, and we were discussing this earlier among ourselves. I mean, one is the issue of efficiency and sobriety, which is now very much on the table. Yeah. And by the way, I think by now everybody makes the distinction between efficiency and sobriety, which is good news. it wasn't on the table very much so if you look back 1 year or 2 years ago. And we all know, I mean, we should all know, and I'm sure in this room we all know, that energy transition does require efficiency and sobriety. We need a reduction in the consumption of energy by around 40%. Okay, so that's one thing that really shouldn't be forgotten out of this crisis. The second thing that really is a lesson to draw from the crisis is how important is affordability of energy and resilience of the system. What do I mean? Well, affordability, I think, doesn't need to be commented. We see how impactful is the incredible increase in the price of energy on households, but also on the corporate sector. It's a big collective issue. It's a major input, energy, not a surprise, but I think we were used to living in a world where energy was cheap. It's not cheap anymore. So I think this goes to sobriety and efficiency because it provides the right signals, but also has to be taken into account in the energy transition. Let's make sure we are very attentive about the price of the cost of the transition. And then resilience. What do I mean by resilience? We are in a situation where there is clearly some tension between supply and demand. And then again, we were at the beginning of the year in a situation where there were some threats from the Russian side to decrease the supply to Europe. We moved early as Engie, we diversified, and our peers in Europe did roughly the same. We are now at a stage where there's no more issue with volumes for the coming winter if the temperature is average, and that's very good news. But that's on the gas side. We all have in mind that in France, there are some tensions on the electricity side. Why? Because we have nuclear power plants which are aging, and their availability is not where we could wish it was. Okay? So we are in a situation where we do see already tensions between supply and demand, be it on the gas side or be it on the electricity side. And I think it's a key point to take into account. When we go into decarbonization, when we push towards more electrification, and Christian was mentioning EV mobility, clearly EV mobility will be part of the solution, but let's be very careful about the speed of the transition, because we have to ensure all along the path that there is balance between supply and demand, that we're not creating extra demand in places where we're not going to meet it. And California is an interesting example. I mean, they told their people that they would have to choose between, I think, air conditioning and charging their vehicles. We don't want to be there. So let's be very, very attentive to the overall cost of the transition and to the speed of the transition, because this will be key for the resilience of what we're doing. And last but not least, and that goes to Christian's point on prices, when you look at energy prices, this is a domain where relative prices have varied extensively. The price of PV has been roughly divided by 10 over a decade. The price of onshore wind has decreased by roughly 70%. At the same time, the price of nuclear energy has increased, also because of the aftermath of Fukushima. So we do see that when thinking about the decarbonized mix for 2030 and after, we will be, and that's from also not only private sector, but also public policy standpoint, we will be in an environment where we know that relative prices will be evolving, and at the same time, we'd better not make a mistake on the energy mix, because it's so important for the competitiveness of our countries and also the affordability to households. So quite a complex field to navigate. But really having a resilient, affordable transition and making sure that we're attentive to technology changes and to what becomes cheaper, what becomes more expensive will be key probably in the years to come.
Maybe just a word about green finance in this context. I think what we have seen these last 10 years is all we have done in terms of developing green finance is to a certain extent at the margin of the markets. It's just adding some patches to the system and the behavior of the market. So new businesses like green bonds, green funds, and so on and so forth. And the heart of the market is still behaving the same way. For example, there is no incentive in terms of green weighting factors for banks. There is no big changes at the way the big institutions like IMF and the IDB and the DFIs are working. And if you look at what happened at the COP 27 last week, when we speak about losses and damages, the first idea is to create a new fund. It's not to change the behavioring of the system itself. It's just adding a new patch. And so I think this we cannot continue to just work at the margin of the system. We have to look at the heart of it. But at the same time, I think we cannot only rely on market-based incentives, and that we need also to use behavior-based solutions. And in terms of green finance, for example, one is the relationship with the citizens and the savers, which is, I think, very key to make them understand that they have the power to also influence the way the money is used. So yeah, just keep the balance between clearly changing the heart of the system and not only using on market-based solutions.
And Christine, what can a bank do in that context of erratic transition, back and forth?
A few things to mention. I think coming back to Claire's point on the tensions, transition means that there will be tensions all along because we are not at any point in time in a stable state. We are moving from one to the other. I think in that respect, and I concur with Christian, that the carbon price would be definitely helping in that, because it gives a price to eventually to CO2, which for decades has been considered as being infinite and at zero cost, which we realize is not the case. So that would help smoothing the path. We should also, I think, all be aware that there are these tensions, and that in the decision process, we should be taking that into account. The strategic planning that we had years back in France, for instance, to make decision on very large program or is useful, is needed, but is not sufficient, because we need to adjust over time. And so sustainable finance is also about that. It's about adjusting the capital allocation, as I was saying. We adjusted 3 years ago the capital we allocate to various energy segments and even into other sectors as to how we allocate within other sectors depending on the climate impact. Is our tool perfect? Definitely not, but it is a tool which allows us to do. So we need doers as well to deliver that and to adjust over time. We need innovation as well, and innovation also in the approach. And I'm not sure we are all, especially in Europe, always very culturally used to that approach. If I look at banking, in the way we are working, innovation is something that is rather recent, and it, for instance, means that we allow for setbacks, that we allow to change or adjust the path we have taken. So for banks, it's capital allocation, it's resource allocation, people allocation. When I said that we are building up expertise in hydrogen, these bankers who are now working in hydrogen, they used to be working on the gas sector, on oil sector, or engineers, reservoir engineers, for instance. So in terms of resources, it's also a question of resource allocation, which is very key. But we are fully convinced of the fact that this is what we need to do and what has to be done. And one point we discussed as well is the attractivity in terms of talents. I think if anyone forgets about the need to do it, I think in terms of attractiveness, that's a daily wake-up call. That if we want to allocate to attract talents, to attract young talents, we need to have that.
Yeah, you want? on talents. Maybe Claire, you want to bounce
Yeah,
back?
indeed, because we had discussed it with Anne-Christine and others on the panel. I mean, our own experience at Engie is that when we clearly took the path of energy transition, and that was a few years ago, what we saw immediately was that the number of CVs, of applications that came to us was multiplied by 3. And clearly today, when you look at I mean, how proud people are to belong to a company, that very much ties to the fact that they are part of energy transition. So indeed, that's another big moving factor in the system.
So maybe to wrap up a bit our conversation, so throughout our discussion, we have seen that there are risk of disorder without transition, but we have also good evidence that the transition is out there. It's non-linear, it's differentiated in terms of geographies, in terms of sectors. So I would like to thank you for sharing your insight. You emphasize that we need to remain focused on the ultimate goal, and that dealing with uncertainty is key. So I propose 4 takeaways. So we need to reconcile ecological transition and social cohesion. You highlighted the need for acceptability, and sovereignty is one lever because it allows purchasing power. We need to be humble and flexible in our strategies, in our tools, and to look at what they deliver. I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the results, and we need to adjust our transition strategies, the technological mix to the outputs and to the results. You also insisted that we need to experiment and to accept setbacks. So indeed, we need to fight greenwashing, but sustainable finance cannot be inquisitorial. So there is a need to accept failure. I think that will be also one of the themes today. And lastly, on the method, we are forced to use hybrid solutions, a bit of market-based one, as you mentioned, to transform the system at its heart, but also behavior ones. So thank you so much. I'm convinced that the rest of the day will allow us all together to hopefully to identify viable solutions. So thank you. And if there are any questions maybe in the room, we'd be very keen to take them.
Maybe could
you have a question, Christian?
I don't have a question. No, just a comment on the previous things. In fact, as investors in responsible funds or things like that, we need to take into account 3 possible scenarios. Mm-hmm. Scenarios 1 is where this bet on responsible finance or climate finance fails because, you know, that's a scenario where there is remaining tension, international tension that makes the Paris Agreement destiny being similar to the Kyoto Protocol, where, you know, sooner or later Europe feels the only region of the world to really doing something, and China does not do anything, and the US is not doing anything. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act is basically doing nothing. Only it's investing in R&D. That's a bet. It's also a bet for discoveries of green technology that could beat the fossil fuels. But it's not one. And in particular, currently in the US, there is nothing in terms of constraining the consumer and the producer to reduce their emissions. So seeing all those things happening in the world, Europe would decide to it's enough. Enough is enough, and those carbon leakage and this industrialization of Europe is unacceptable, and we will stop doing anything for climate change and following the general mood of the waiting game. So that's a solution where, you know, in this scenario, investing in climate finance was a bad bet. But the other two scenarios are the good ones. And the first scenario is this Mohamed scenario, where the renewable energy becomes cheaper than fossil fuel, and then this bet of investing in those industries and assets that anticipate that was a good bet. The alternative is that does not happen, and I believe that will not happen soon. Even by the year 2050, we will still need a high carbon price to get that those renewable energy are more attractive than fossil fuel for the consumer and the producers. In that case, if the good scenario would be that Europe will remain strong to impose this carbon price to the people, and in that case, betting on greener assets would have been a good bet. It requires social acceptability of that. Whether it exists or not in Europe these days, I don't know. But at least in these three scenarios, two are in favor of betting in climate finance. But one, we have to keep in mind that there is one scenario where investing in climate finance will make you miserable.
What's your preferred scenario? Maybe I can ask every...
No, I want to go back to the price of energy and also Mohamed's scenario, which for me is very much what we also need to take away from this crisis. I mean, how do we alleviate the tensions between supply and demand, both for gas and electricity? The answer is renewable energy. And indeed, I believe that we are in an area where there is a lot of capital to invest, but then the marginal cost is very, very, very low when you look at renewable energy. And when you look at what happened to PV, for instance, and onshore wind in France, I mean, people used to think that, oh, these are energies which are intermittent, plus they are very costly to the budget. Well, guess what? With the prices we have seen because of the energy crisis, these assets has actually paid back to the budget the money they received. I think that's a key point to have in mind, which also means that if we, and of course it's always easy to do counterfactual scenarios, but if we had invested more years ago on these energies, well, the net budget cost by now would be the same, meaning balance, okay, and we would be in a situation where we import much less. Because whatever the intermittence is, when you look at the electricity production in France and its consumption, you see that on the days where there is a big production of renewable because there is wind or there is sun, well, these are imports which are less important. I mean, it's a clear one-to-one equivalence, if you wish. So really, that's true for electricity. We need to accelerate the production of renewable electricity. That's a clear-cut message that we need to take away from the crisis. And we have to keep in mind that in the next 15 years, there will be no new nuclear. Yep. It takes about 15 years to build. So the only way to increase the capacities is through renewable energy in the next few years. And it's also true for gas, because we do have alternatives to Russian gas. And actually, for those of you who know biomethane is currently pretty small. It's about 1-2% of gas consumption in France, but it has the ability to reach roughly 20% in 2030 for biomethane, and 20%, guess what? It's the amount of Russian gas that we used to have. So clearly here we need to accelerate renewable, both electric and gas, and that will be a good way also to increase our resilience.
I would like to add that I believe as well in the renewable scenario, in the competition that we can have, but there is a key element to that, which is a competition. Why have we seen the renewable pricing going down so fast and so much? Is thanks to the competition and to the private sector being put in competition and bidding, and we have been part of these bidding processes, and as a financier, this is how we've been bringing innovation to bring the cost down, the financing cost. There are also all the costs related to that. So that is key, and I think the public sector in that respect has a key role to play to make sure that the competition is there. And that's why the carbon price, I think, together with policies, and then the competition of the private sector is a good way to make sure we optimize the cost of the transition. And I think private sectors have shown that when there is competition, they can do it well.
Just one, I mean, whatever the scenario, I mean, there is one thing which is certain is that as investors, as bankers, the only thing we can do is to continue to invest in green finance and to finance transition, finance green assets, and also finance energy efficiency and sobriety. And also we need investments to become more sober and more efficient. So there is no big deal, I mean, in terms of what we should do.
So thank you so much. Throughout the day, we will confront ourselves with the notion of scenario, especially during the role-playing game. So you've really opened the way to one of the next formats. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.